Welcome one and all to the Ace Podcast. I'm Pete Paphides, and this week I'm joined by a musician who established himself pretty much upon the release of his first record as one of the foremost guitarists of his generation. With Suede, he made 2 albums whose importance and influence seems to grow with every passing year. Then he jumped straight into another equally fruitful musical partnership with the magnificent David McCalmont, and together they scored a huge hit single with Yes, and made 2 albums of life-affirming modern soul standards, which still sound fantastic to this day. Somewhere among all that, he also made 2 excellent albums for Creation Records, which spawned numerous hits, although I suspect that, as a devoted Arsenal fan, he will have derived more pleasure from the fact that one song from those records ended up being Match of the Day's Goal of the Month music. In the intervening years, he has established a second career as a producer of some note. He was instrumental in the success of the Libertines and Duffy, and he also worked on records by Bert Jansch, Tricky, Kate Nash, and more recently, Mark Eitzel. In the last few years, he's struck up a hugely productive musical relationship with Ben Watt, having appeared on Ben's acclaimed albums Hendra and Fever Dream, and toured extensively with him. But at the heart of it all, he remains an obsessive fan of records, and it's that love of records that shines through on the weekly show he hosts with Mark Kingston for Boogaloo Radio, BB and the King. I am, of course, talking about Bernard Butler, and he's right here next to me. How's it going, Bernard?
Good, Pete. Thanks. Can I have that? Can you just print that out now, and I'll just use that forever? And just if we leave it there as well.
It's okay. There'll be a small fee involved, Bernard, but
Yeah,
we
I'm
can
sure.
discuss that later. We heard the tinkling of teacups and spoons because it's lovely here. It's a very convivial place to be having a conversation about music, and you'll be hearing far more stirring because I take 1 lump of sugar in my tea. So it's lovely to catch. It's always lovely to catch up with you because, as I said, you are first and foremost a music fan, and did that ever sort of diminish as you got caught up within the sort of business of making records?
Yeah. Not so much the business, but yeah, as you said, making records. I think probably when I go through periods of making records, if I'm intensely working with an artist or just in the studio, I don't tend to listen to music apart from what I'm working on. So, and if that's for months at a time, I won't listen to music at home, really. I mean, I'll listen to what I'm doing, and so music will be coming home from the studio, and then I'll be A-Bing it with what I hear at home and in the car. But that's the rest of the time, it's Radio 4.
Okay.
which I think is a good headspace to be in. I don't really... The reason for that is not just the economy of not having time, but it's... I don't like my head being filled up with outside influences.
Does it make you question what you're doing? Is that the reason why?
It makes you question it, and also it starts to alter your vision. And if you have a vision from the start, and if you follow it fully all the way, then I kind of have a belief that vision will take you to different places. But if you start having little turnings added to that vision along the way, then you're getting sidetracked and you're going down that side road, and it may be quite a good side road, but you're not seeing through that vision.
Are you a player-alonger when it comes to records and your guitar? Would you sort of have your guitar on your lap and sort of play along to what you're listening to?
Not really, no. I mean, I was as a teenager, of course. I mean, that's how you learn everything. Sitting in your bedroom, but not really. I mean, it goes into my head really more. And I think the way I've always learned records in order to play on the guitar is that I have to absorb them first, and they have to go in, and so I have a memory of them, so that when I turn the record off, then I can go and remember it, and it comes to my hands,
Well, and maybe assimilate them into what you're doing.
Yeah,
really.
Which is part of part of what we've been talking about today, and with hearing new music and or old music that you've never heard before. It's the reason why that situation is very inspirational is that you get one taste of something, and you have a kind of blurred vision of it. And the memory comes back to you in terms of the rhythm, the feel, the energy, all those kind of things, but not necessarily the specific words, chords, or anything that you're basically going to steal.
And that's good in a way, because you want to retain the feel. You want an emotional memory because you're hoping to propagate that emotion in maybe the thing that you're about to do.
Yeah. I mean, and also often when it's artists you don't know, that's also a big bonus, because obviously you can have an attachment to artists that you know and things that you, for example, I don't want to make a record that sounds like the Beatles today because I'm working with a synthesizer duo or something like that, and you don't want or you're working with a 4-piece guitar group, and so you don't want to reference the Beatles or something like that. So you don't want that attachment. But if you hear something that has an energy and you can't picture what they look like, you don't have a history of the record, what happened to them afterwards or before, I feel it's an energy that it's an exciting energy that comes out of the speaker, and it's quite a purist feel.
Well, this seems to be a good time to talk about a famous instance, really, in which that happened with you and Duffy, which was. I think I love what I hear about this story, and I'm not sure how much of it is true. But this, she the story I hear is that you wrote Rock Ferry together after, and that was obviously you went on to have that huge hit with Mercy. But the idea of Duffy, I almost feel that maybe came from your first meeting with her.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's hard for me to stick my name next to it, exclusively. I mean, all that happened is I was introduced to her by Rough Trade, and it felt a little bit like it was her last shot. She'd done so, and I was played something by her, and it was very of its time, Radio 2 music with a nice recorded acoustic guitar and a very nice mid-range voice. Someone who could sing clearly, but it didn't do much for me. But I thought that she could do something. Yeah. And what interested me is what would happen if I did exactly what I wanted and saw how somebody who was quite young and impressionable, how they'd respond, to that. And the 99 times out of 100, you'd fully expect them to say, well, this isn't what I want to do, go away, and I totally accept that. But the gamble is the 1 out of 100 where you feel, what if? And that's always the great moment in music, I think. I mean, for me, I think lots of producers and writers do work along the level where they want the 99 times out of 100 to happen every time, and it to be simple. And it if I'm honest, it's not great in career terms, but it just doesn't motivate me. Yeah. But the what if always motivates me in music.
That tension, yeah.
Yeah. What if
the jeopardy?
Exactly. What could happen? Because otherwise, what is the point of meeting? And so with her, I got like 2 hours in somebody's little studio. It didn't have much equipment, and I played her something that I'd been working on. And something that was and it was just an idea that I wanted to work with somebody, and I wanted to find somebody who'd fit with it, and she went with it, wow. And she went with it, and we wrote the song Rock Ferry, and in about 2 hours, and she recorded the vocal during that time as well. I mean, we literally recorded it's just a piano riff and a drum beat, and with the principle of that song is that there's no chorus. And so the principle it's like a blues call and response that works in an A-B, and then for the second verse the same thing repeats, but the vocal goes up a register, and then for the third time it happens, it goes up an octave. So you're literally just stepping up. It's quite a mathematical, simple thing.
And is it true that she was really resistant to breaking out of going up? So
yeah, I mean, I got her to record the vocal before we'd finished the song. We wrote one verse and she recorded it, and then we did the next one, and then by the time we got to the third one, she said, "No, I'm not doing that." And I said, no, I want you to go all the way. You've got to go. You can't go back down to the first. It's missing the point of the song. And she did it once and said immediately, "I hate it. I don't want to do that," because it was her Mariah moment, what she called, going quite soprano and into her highest register. And I can understand that, because as a singer, when you go into that high register, it's almost like a gas enters your head or something. Like you become slightly faint, and I think it's quite an experience, and I think you have to either go with that or feel, no, this isn't, you're not comfortable at all. It's nowhere near your speaking voice for a start, so it's quite an unusual sound. But never, I mean, she did it to her credit, and I went away, and I just remember going away that day, and it was a Friday afternoon, and thinking it was, and going back to Rough Trade and saying to them, look, we did something, and I either think it's awful or brilliant, but I don't really think it's anywhere in between. I just knew that it was the nature of what we'd done. It was you're just not going to get it, or you're just going to love it. And I remember them listening to it and on a car journey, and then stopping the car and phoning me 10 minutes later and saying, well, they loved it, and because they gave that faith to Duffy, she went with it, and I met her again, and I mean, I don't think she really had complete faith, and she didn't really understand what was good about it all, but she understood that if somebody likes it, then that's fine with her, just for now.
So a while later, I met her, and she was raving about a record that you'd introduced to her, which was Dave Godin's Deep Soul Treasures, and that seemed to be central to her perception of what it was that she was trying to do, and that had apparently come from you. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, after we did that Rock Ferry Day, so she started coming down to London. She lived in North Wales still, and she'd come down for a couple of days at a time and come around to my house, and we'd just play records, start downstairs where I've got a piano and the hi-fi, and she'd stand by the piano, and we'd just play records and drink tea and talk. And then we'd go upstairs where I had a little studio room and do something. And so in that first hour when she came round, I just tried to play her music. And I guess I'm older than her, and have collected records and CDs, and I don't think she had that. She didn't.
But you've been alive longer, so you will have more stuff.
Exactly, more stuff. And so she saw this stuff in our front room, and was picking stuff out and saying, "What's this like? What's this?" And we'd put it on, and she'd just stand and take note of it, really. And it's quite interesting. She never really said to me, "Oh my God, I listened to that, and that's just amazing." But I just gave her stuff, and she got an iPod. And I filled it with illegally at the time, of course. Filled it with CDs and just said, "Look, here's lots of music," because she had a 4-hour train journey back to Wales, and so I thought, just here's loads of music, just go and listen to music. And so so one of the principal things I did for her, I gave her was the Dave Godin Deep Soul Treasures set, which is. I mean, one of the many things I love about it, that the attraction is, as we were talking about, lots of the names when you look down the playlist. If you're thinking somebody who's going to give you a great soul album or a compilation, you'd be hoping to see Otis on there. Actually, Otis is on there, but you'd be hoping to see Marvin Gaye and Otis Redding and etc. on there. And you don't. You look down there and you see some fairly odd names: Zurban Hicks and the Dynamics, Garnet Mims, Doris Duke, lots of Dorises. And
Dorrie Grayson as well, who's almost a Doris.
There you go. And it's you're either put off by that or intrigued by it. And the attraction for me, and also in introducing it, giving it to Duffy, was that. I'm sure she had a Motown best of, I'm sure she had all those things already, or she's aware of, I think that's where all the music she had at the time was the best of Motown, the best of ABBA, the best of, those kind of things. That's where she learned to sing. But giving her
the record collections that normal people have.
Exactly. Well, I guess so, yeah. Car CDs, But I wanted to give her that inspiration that she wasn't attached to the artist and she wasn't attached to a memory. So she wasn't. If you gave Duffy or any singer, if you give a singer a record of a singer they know, they might love that singer, but it's almost like saying, "I want you to sound like Aretha. I want you to sound like Morrissey, or whatever," and that can be an instant killer.
Yeah, absolutely.
They can say, "Well, I love Aretha, but not for me."
It's a bit of an onerous challenge as well.
For many reasons, it can psychologically. Everything with singers is a psychological game. It always has been. So that's the attraction of the Deep Soul Treasures. I mean, the fact that you listen to one track after another, which completely blows you away, it astonishes me.
Yeah,
and I feel what you get from it, because you don't know. If you were to listen to that for the first time and you never heard it, you wouldn't be taken away. You wouldn't be walking away singing the songs like you do in Motown. You're sort of blown away by the energy and the sort of the thunder of it. A lot of the tracks start with quite thunderous drums. They reach climaxes very quickly. A lyrical climax. There's lyrical stories in there that are just. I think this is how he described it. Is the idea of standing on the edge of the cliff and being told to sing for your life. And I think that's
what Dave Godin.
I think that was what Dave Godin's description of that was his definition, his criteria for fitting into these.
Yeah, I mean they're amazing. There's that. What's it? Raw. Oh yeah. Talking of names, Raw Spit. What a great name for an artist. Excuse me. Sorry.
I mean that theory as well. That idea of standing on the edge of the cliff. It for me. He's talking about soul music, which I understand, but I'm from London and I was born in 1970. It's not my world, but my world is music, which does have that emotional impact within where I was brought up with, English guitar groups and etc. And the dynamic I had with previous artists like David McAlmont, but also Brett Anderson in Suede, is that we were young and we were very fiery and very passionate, and between us we weren't making soul music by any means, but we had that same idea. We would say similar things to each other as this should be the last thing you ever do, and we'd spoken this way before we made records.
You've always seemed to have made records like that. It's kind of emotionally high stakes music, and so I could see it kind of makes sense to me actually that you let's kind of reference a couple. I know you mentioned "Try Love" when we were talking earlier on by Dory Grayson, and you mentioned in particular the sort of piano arpeggio. Can you sort of elaborate on that slightly?
Yeah, I mean this is one thing that happens over lots of these tracks. It also happens Doris Duke. I think in these very tender moments, there's plenty of tracks where they start these little tender, quite high-pitched piano arpeggio, often in a waltz time, and it seems to be a reference, a production reference that goes through lots of these tracks. And I find one of the things about these compilations is that they do run as albums. He's structured them so they have explosive beginnings and quite emotional endings, and in the middle you do get quite almost lightweight tracks, quite pretty little motifs with, again, extraordinary stories, and that's one of the things I like about it.
There's a great track. There's a lot of the tracks were kind of contemporaneous to the Vietnam War, so you get things like "Lights Out," and I think I mentioned "Songs to Sing" as well by was that Raw Spit? I think. So this real sense of even if you're not there, it's kind of, you almost sort of, there's a kind of Judgment Day atmosphere to a lot of what's being sung. I guess that was the times.
Showdown, I love that. I mean, I was drawn to the title for the start, and then there's going to be a showdown, and musically there's a showdown. It feels like velvet curtains are dropping in the song, and it's very dark, and there's timpani going on, and so I'm very attracted to this music.
Velvet. I love the fact that you said velvet curtains, because that's kind of what I get. I get it in Rock Ferry, and I get it in Yes. That kind of. That kind of slightly faded Locarno sort of ambience, the kind of, a mirror ball that doesn't kind of work anymore, or glitter ball rather. That sort of faded sort of grandeur. And you sort of do get it in a lot of this music. So it's in a way, it's not so surprising to me that you kind of, this is what you're naturally drawn to anyway.
Yeah, I think Duffy's take on it would be that, I add the dirt. For me, it's not really dirt, but there is a sense of being dragged out of the gutter rather than, already sitting in a fantastic restaurant. The music, you're trying to pull yourself out all the time, and you're just making it, and it's that moment of just making it, that you get in great films, which is, that's my musical interpretation, that I'm attracted to.
I love that high emotion. I mean, that's what we listen to music for, surely. If we don't listen for these moments of emotional jeopardy, I don't really know what we're listening to it for. And, that's kind of, I feel like I'm missing that from, I don't want to be the middle-aged guy who says, I can't find anything to listen to in the chart. I really don't want to be that guy. But I feel like that kind of emotional jeopardy, I get it, I still get it from a lot of R&B, but I don't sort of get it from a lot of the kind of straight down the line kind of pop music that's kind of happening at the moment. And I really want to get it, but it seems to just not be in fashion at the moment.
Yeah, I can't explain that.
No,
it's
Let's go back to the guitar thing, because you mentioned a couple of guitarists you mentioned earlier on, and. Let's start with James Burton, actually. How did he sort of enter your orbit?
James Burton I first saw with Elvis at Vegas in the film That's the Way It Is, the tour film. I think it was his reintroduction after being in movies for years.
Late 60s, was it?
I think it was 69.
Yeah.
And this band was assembled and they were going to be filmed rehearsing in these really corny rehearsal sessions where Elvis was just showing off and of course, and being Elvis, and then, being on stage at Vegas with the orchestra and this a very wide stage. That always interested me, that the stage wasn't deep, that everyone would be lined up in one line. The orchestra, the drummer would be next to the guitarist and the bass player and the backing singers all at the side.
Which is
so
fair,
so that Elvis could go from left to right and it could be seen, moving that far. Anyway, which I always really like that, the drummer being down, not on a big roster. But anyway, James Burton, that's my first introduction to James Burton, standing there with a Paisley Telecaster. Which was his signature guitar, and being the guy that stands rock solid, with one leg slightly bent and just doing it, I'm watching.
That's appealing to you.
I love that. He just looked hard as nails, and I'm standing here behind him because that's what he pays me to do.
Yeah.
Don't think for a second he's cooler than me.
But I'm
going to allow him that thought.
You haven't always been that guitarist, though, have you? There have been times where you've been like,
me, no.
But
I love watching that.
I've seen you be both.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have played both roles. I mean, obviously, when people, the visual memory of me. There's probably far more studio moments of me standing like James Burton, in that moment. And I think it goes back to that period when I was working with Duffy and producing lots of artists, where I had to learn to be, and I wanted to learn to be the person that could apply myself to the record, rather than defining the record.
Yeah.
Apply yourself to the voice. So what are we going to do? Who are we going to be now? Are we going to be James Burton today, or are we going to be whoever we want to be? And what kind of record are we're going to make? And having to be that person. And I think it also coincides with, I'm known to people who are fans of Suede or something that as a particular kind of guitar player, but for most singers that don't care about guitars, they're not interested in anything but themselves and their own voice. That's just the truth of it. It's the reality, and that's a very good discipline, actually. It's not a criticism. It's they're very interested in the voice being the vision of the record. And the vehicle, I'm interested in the vehicle that lets the voice be, at the front of a recording. And so sometimes that's getting on a piano, and sometimes it's playing tambourine, and sometimes it's playing something really gentle. And that's what James Burton was always in my head during that period, is that guy who just stood there at the side, looking so cool. And when he's told to pull out a solo, he does it. And the rest of the time he just stands back and does it. What he does, and he looks fantastic. And what was interesting is I found this recording of James Burton early recordings, with again lots of music that I wasn't aware he made, and lots of music I've never heard before,
such as.
So I mean, he was known for Elvis, but before that he was known for being the sidekick of Ricky Nelson. And that track, My Babe, is a big hit and a very well-known song. But what interested me, what I found on this record was the instrumentals. It's something you don't get very often these days. You certainly don't get guitar players releasing instrumentals and them being massive hits.
No, it's true.
It's something that's been left behind, probably for good reasons. But there was a period in, I guess, the 50s and the 60s when it was very much the thing to do. Electric guitars were almost like demonstrations of new technology, and he made records. There was a record just demonstrating the dobro.
Right,
as the new guitar. Jimmy Dobro was one of his monikers.
Oh,
and
okay.
And there's a chorus. There's actually a chorus of ladies singing Dobro. it's really good. And but I found these couple of tracks, Swamp Surfer and Cannonball Rag and Jimmy's Blues, and the attitude is so heavy on them. His guitar playing, it's just like grit. I can't describe how the track is. Probably Swamp Surfer or Jimmy's Blues, which are just cutting and have this bluesy kind of drama that's very tense and just about to break out.
I know what you mean. About the thing with new technology. New technology is exciting, and we relate to it in a different way than we do to sort of, a few years down the line when, you sort of take it for granted and your relationship with it becomes almost a kind of more cerebral one, or more of a sort of to do with hanging back and kind of just allowing your virtuosity to sort of set the tone. But in those early days, and I think also this is why young bands are often just, the most exciting thing in the world is to see a young band who are just kind of just trying to find an outlet for that energy. And this brings me on, well, first of all, it brings me on to another guitarist, Wray, whose early recordings really sort of convey that huge excitement about what this new thing can do. And you mentioned Wray as well earlier on, didn't you?
Well, Wray, he's known for very visceral, jagged, wiry, those are the kind of words used. Very low played, almost baritone on the lower strings, twangy electric guitar riffs, and instrumentals again, and which are all fantastic. And then we found this collection called 3-Track Shack, which is when he holed up in his brother's country farm and recorded his own solo records, and which are warm, fuzzy, big sounding, and all as was the time, all going back to nature and seeing what we'd missed and how we'd messed things up during the 60s. If only they'd made it this far. And on this Wray album, the 3-Track Shack, is a track called Falling Rain, which I discovered via Carl Blau, who recorded it with Tucker Martin, the producer, who has made loads of great records for all sorts of people in the last 10 years. His father was a Nashville songwriter who worked with Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis, and I think he grew up on a lot of country music. And he put together his dream album and got this guy, Carl Blau, who's made quite a few records before, varying degrees, but he has this fantastic baritone, and put him on the front cover with a Stetson and sort of a rhinestone jacket. And this is a beautiful record. So this is the new record, introducing Carl Blau, which came out last year, and it has all sorts of other beautiful covers on it. To Love Somebody, which you'll probably be interested in
very much.
But Wray's Falling Rain, which is a beautiful song, and Carl Blau's version is absolutely beautiful. You must know that. I love it.
I know the Wray album from which Falling Rain is on. Yeah, because that was a sort of, I bought that just because of its sleeve, because it shows Wray in profile. Yeah, as sort of, it's kind of a nod to his Native American heritage. Yeah, because he looks like a sort of Native American Indian. Yeah. That track, Falling Rain, is something else.
It is.
Just gorgeous.
It's really gorgeous. A gorgeous lyric. one of those where you're waiting patiently just for the next line, and it just falls, and it's just, wow, another great line.
And I love that thing where you can play a track by someone, you don't tell them who it's by, and then you can say, well, actually, that's Link Wray in this, which would be, to anyone who thinks that they know Link Wray from his early stuff, would be very surprised.
Of course, yeah.
And
well, a great lyric.
Yeah,
mainly.
And again, that no indication that was in him.
Yeah,
from things like, that. Also, like you say, there's kind of scratchy early recordings, which sort of you really feel like they're evoking a very remote place. The first Link Wray track I ever heard was an instrumental called "Run Chicken Run." Have you ever heard that at all?
I don't know that.
I mean, I love it. There are at least 2 Link Wray songs that mention chickens in the title, which gives you an indication of how far removed we are from any kind of metropolitan sort of scene. And it is that very kind of undiscovered sort of, middle of nowhere America that they evoke. It's literally seems to be a song about, at least, inspired by a chicken.
I mean, I think of with the other Link Wray. So that I think I know 2 Link Wrays, which is probably really unfair, but I guess we all have that. But I think of darkness, bars, electricity, the city, all those kind of things. And with this, you see a barn.
Yes,
and deserted, the middle of America. But the Carblow record is very highly recommended, and of course he opened for Ben Watt in Seattle, and so we'd heard this record and we're really excited to have this man arrive on a white horse one day in Seattle, and of course he turned up in a hoodie and with a loop pedal. Sometimes
you're just better off not knowing.
And he was a nice guy, and but it's a beautiful record.
Fantastic. So do you still sort of, I guess you're still sort of updating are you still apt to being surprised? I mean, you're such an incredible guitarist. Is it? Are you still learning from these people?
Oh God! I mean, you say about do I sit down and play along? I mean, I don't often, but this morning I was listening to Cannonball Rag and the James Burton track we were talking about, and I just went straight to a YouTube tutorial and sat down with the guitar. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, because I just sometimes when you hear things like that, you just say, I need to learn that. I need to know how to do that.
and is it just a matter of just finding out the method, or do you have to really apply yourself?
I mean, again, I'm not a technical guitar player. I never have been. I'm always a bit like I am with the way I take inspirations. I listen to a record once, turn it off and go and try and do something from memory. So as a guitar player, I'm not ever going to sit for 3 hours with tabs and tutorials and all those kind of things. I'll take something and then I'll play it. For example, I'll watch something that's on an acoustic guitar, and I'll find myself playing an electric guitar, and I'll make it a bit noisier and a bit slower, and I'll feel, well, I'll probably leave Cannonball Rag for today, but this is quite good.
Right.
So
okay.
I feel that's probably healthier, because of course on YouTube there is always 5,000 people in Colombia who can already play that much better than you.
Yeah.
And it's just ticking a box really to be able to say, look, I did it. But to be able to do something with character that's unique is again that purist mentality that I think is more important, And I think going back to again the way it links up with people like Dave Godin, I think Dave Godin is a hugely, it's a brilliant character, a great influence, and also there is a side that the Dave Godin in life is also very negative, a cloud hanging over every musician, because if you try and reach that criteria, he's one of those people who holds that criteria of what is great, really, not just, as you say, something nice to listen to on a Sunday, but it's something that literally you're going to hold your life to. Is this good enough?
Yeah.
And when you hold yourself to that kind of criteria in music, it's very tricky to live up to with yourself.
Absolutely.
And you find yourself with Dave Godin's in your head all the time, just sitting there while you're trying to work and thinking, is this ever going to be? Would this make Deep Soul Treasures?
They need to be there. Those people in your head, though, don't they? Because otherwise, you sort of.
Well, I think for the guy in Colombia who's done the tutorial for Cannonball Rag probably hasn't got a Dave Godin in his head. He just wants to tick the box that technically he's put in the hours to do that, and that's a lovely thing. But I think in order to, if you want to try and live up to, if you're a musician and you grow up with records and you want to do that thing yourself, you have to be as good as it.
And you have to it's sort of a demon that kind of seeks you out in a way, isn't it? And I was thinking, another thing I was listening to earlier on today was the another Ace compilation is the Bert Jansch's Young Man Blues compilation, which
that's the Glasgow.
The early recordings,
sketchy recordings, isn't it? Yeah.
But I was listening to his version of Angie on that. And it's so early that I wonder if Davy Graham had even, who, for people who don't know, who actually wrote Angie and sort of effectively ushered in the sort of folk jazz blues guitar revival. I wonder if Davy had even recorded Angie, but it's such an early version. I wonder that maybe Bert might have learnt it from watching him play it.
Yeah, I think he did. I think when he was alive and when I spoke to him, he did. A lot of these were learnt by ear, sitting next to each other. Bert never played records when I was around his flat. I mean, I spent a lot of time at his flat, and I think once he put on a Mingus record for me. He put on an Arum to demonstrate this thing that he was talking about with Davy Graham, and that's the only time I remember him putting on a record. And he didn't have many records.
No.
And I think from those times, certainly it was learnt by ear, and I think the Davy Graham was the Dave Godin in Bert's head for sure. Yeah, he would be hanging over him. Yeah, he was hugely reverent to
There's
Dave.
a sort of almost gonzoid sort of attack to those early versions of Angie that Bert used to play, and I kind of, as I'm sure you must have done, try to imagine him in those kind of in a lot of those folk clubs of the early 60s, which would have been quite reverential, scholarly places. And I sort of imagine like Bert shuffling in and playing this. To call it folk, it never does it justice, I think, because it's not really. I don't see it as being. I mean, it's more like a blues, but even blues, there's a real. You can really see what Jimmy Page. The seed of what Jimmy Page wanted to do, and just like you say, David Graham might have been the Dave Godin in Bert's head. I think maybe Bert was the David Graham or the Dave Godin in Jimmy Page's head. It kind of goes on, but
for sure, yeah. I mean, I think that you're right. I mean, it's the blues aspect that I find more interesting to Bert's work, and he spoke a lot about the jazz. References, particularly with Davy Graham, that fed in. Mingus was a big one, and I think they used the folk songs, the folk idea, the folk method to put that across. But I don't think that I think the ones that are most influential, certainly in rock music, are the ones that have that blues influence.
Yeah,
and. Like you say, with Bert, David Graham's Angie is much more technical. It's much more together, and it was something that was learnt. And Bert's was from memory, I think, and it is. It is again. It's got that visceral tendency to it, quite aggressive, quite out of time, and where he drops little bars here and there, and beats. And I can imagine there was lots of chaps, beatniks, scratching their chins in their suits and ties, sitting in those clubs thinking, no, I saw Davey do it last week, and no, to be honest, this chap doesn't have the chops.
No, was it ever and it's a cycle that repeats itself a lot, doesn't it? You got it with like when the Pogues first appeared, they offended folk, Irish folk purists. And I guess it's a sign that you're onto something good in a way, I think.
I used to play with Bert all the time, and I knew going into it. First of all, I made a decision: I'm never going to play acoustic guitar next to this guy because there's no point. But he doesn't play the electric guitar, so bully for me. I can do something you can't, and he never did anyway. But But I was totally aware that I was going up in front of people who'd seen Bert, through the years, and that they were just going to be looking at me thinking, who's this young scallywag with his electric instrument? What's going on here? And Bert did say to me a few times that he thought that was funny, and he quite liked that, because he secretly didn't really like that attachment. He liked he liked winding them up a little bit.
He did,
the Aaron Jumper Brigade, as he used to call them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's this funny, ambivalent relationship that I think a lot of the bluesier characters in the sort of quote-unquote folk scene sort of had. It's the world that they were kind of co-opted into, but not necessarily the world that they would have chosen to be part of in the general sort of scheme of things.
Yeah, it wasn't very rock and roll, time of rock and roll.
And Bert, as we know, was one of the most rock and roll people you could have, in his own way.
Yeah, in his own way he was, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay. Let's talk about a couple of other sort of tracks that you've set aside. I think you mentioned earlier on, I don't know, might not necessarily be expected to see Doris Day in your list of preferred records.
I love Doris Day. Well, I love this track, and I think I did discover. These two compilations, the Deep Soul Treasures, and the Jack Nitzsche story. I don't know how I ended up with this, but it was at the same time. That's time of Duffy, yeah, and it was this track, Move Over Darling, was a big influence on me. Yeah, at that time, because I guess Doris Day would be somebody who I remembered from, being a small child and seeing her movies on a Saturday afternoon, and my mum liking her or something, and it had been completely written off. And then I got this CD of the producer, the arranger, Jack Nitzsche, who was Phil Spector's right-hand man. Also worked with the Stones and Neil Young, and did many film scores, and had that great crossover between the 60s and 70s where he was very rock and roll, and but also worked in orchestral scores and did a lot of great pop music. And so he seemed to be trusted by all sides.
And I love that the 60s was brilliant for that, because you had all these band leaders and arrangers who had come from maybe, light orchestral music, and they had all these skills which could, if necessary, be co-opted into pop music and rock and roll. And I kind of miss that. So I think that's some amazing music was made because of that.
Yeah, budgets could be huge for a start, which is a big difference. It makes a big difference these days. One of the things that I read researching this was how he'd pick engineers to work with. Jack Nitzsche would be out in the room, he'd be the scorer, the arranger, so he'd be out with the musicians, and there could be dozens and dozens, an orchestra, and everything going down in one hit. So the backing track going down in one hit, that's quite a feat if you're standing in a room. But also playing between the live room where the musicians are and the control room where the engineers are trying to mix, basically on the fly. And one of the interesting things I picked up on he'd always pick a studio and an engineer who could read the score off the mixing desk. So I'd be looking at the score and reading, and the reason for that was because the engineer would be trying to judge where the music got louder and where more things were happening, and in order to do that you had to be able to read the score. And I thought that was a really interesting, another one of those details of lost art, in recordings. It's something that you'd find in orchestral studio. You might find in Abbey Road these days, or places where they do film scores, but you wouldn't find that in a regular recording setup. And the skill to be able to put down these recordings. And I think one of the great skills about the great things about having that skill of all the musicians playing at once in a room is. It's not just the technical ability to record it and mix it in one hit, but actually the thrill of being a musician in a room and knowing that you get that one chance, and you could be the guy that messes it up.
Yeah, and that transmits itself. There's again, it's about so much of what we've spoken about, if not explicitly. Implicitly involves tension, really, and jeopardy, which is a word we've mentioned before. Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think it's electric. I've done that. I've done it a couple of times. Been lucky enough to do things like that,
And
what springs to mind?
Well, I did a track last year for Duffy, funnily enough, and it was for an advert for Burberry. So it's in a way, it's a bit of a waste because it turned out great, and ended up using 15 seconds in a perfume advert.
Can it come out in its entirety?
I think it is, actually. I think they did post it recently on YouTube, and it was a cover of I Put a Spell on You.
Amazing.
The Screaming Jay Hawkins track. And I managed to convince Burberry to let me hire Abbey Road Studio One with an orchestra, a harp player, a horn section, as well as me, Mako, my trusty drummer, piano player, me playing guitar, and amidst the whole shebang, Duffy in a box in the middle of the room.
I think there are a lot of people that would love you to finish off what you started with Duffy. Really, 'cause it never did get finished off.
Well, no, that's another.
It went well, though. I mean, I didn't know you'd met up with her again. I did, because it had been.
I know. I speak to her all the time. Yeah, I mean, but we did this last year anyway. I convinced her to do it, and I think she thought I was mad. But the reason why I've done it before with her as well, and the reason I always suggest it is I know that it will put exactly what we're saying, that tension in the room. Everyone will be tense. As a singer, if somebody suggests that to you, you either say, "No, I'm not doing that."
Fair play to her then.
And absolutely, most people in the world would that'd be ridiculous. Of course, I'm not going to do it and sing live. And to her, she just said, "Okay." We did it. The way we set it up was in an old-fashioned way and rehearsed all day until the strings came in, which are very expensive. So the strings could only come in for the 2 hours in the evening, and
which you love, obviously.
Which is fantastic because it gets to the evening and it's like the lights go down and suddenly everyone's in the room and Duffy's in there with a bottle of wine and she's in the booth and we're all ready to go, and we did several takes and we got it down and chose, and I got to the end of the night and I just thought, oh my God, I've no idea. And I took it away, and I sort of just didn't sleep that night, basically, because I thought if we haven't got the take. I mean, bear in mind that, to reiterate, this is everybody playing at once in the same room. So the sound of the drums is all over the sound of the strings, and all over her vocal. She has to sing in tune, technically everything, and never mind me playing guitar in the bits to be all.
But that's kind of an interesting thing about you, because I think you are an inversion of a thing that you get with a lot of musicians, which is that, they like a kind of a safe, controlled environment in the studio, and actually away from the studio, at home, everything's kind of falling apart. They're terrible. They're not terrible at keeping a family together, or whatever. And you're the opposite of that. You seem to have a very kind of solid sort of family life. You don't sort of travel too much. That's all in place, seemingly, with you. And yet in work, repeatedly, I've noticed, without wanting to sound too much like your psychotherapist, you do seem to kind of like to engineer sort of situations where it could all just fall apart.
Yeah. You should see our kitchen on Saturday morning, though. But I like the idea. I mean, I'm a musician first and foremost, and I like being in that situation. And I feel that if other musicians don't get themselves in that situation or don't get given the chance to, I feel that secretly they thrive off it and you can get the best out of them. Yeah. And so if you choose well, the string players are always thrilled they're always just delighted because they see the singer, they see me playing guitar, and they love the sound. Everyone loves the sound of it. To be in that room, there's some of my favourite, that's one of my favourite studio memories. It's just being in that room at 9 o'clock at night, looking around me thinking, oh my God, this sounds it might sound shit, but it sounds unbelievable. It's a noise, it's a noise. And I love that feeling of the noise and everyone looking aside, and you can just 1 foot out place of everybody, that tension. And I think that's something that I take visually from Deep Soul, Treasures, all these records. I don't know what these people look like or anything, but when I hear these records, I see that in the room. In my head, that's what's happening. And so I go off and try and do that. It's probably not,
No, you're right. You get it a lot. This is what's so amazing about this back catalogue, because it's full of these moments which, as you say, a lot of these people probably never entered a recording studio again, but something like, and it's all out. Ace are very good at kind of pulling these kind of moments from God knows what archive they're even in, but like even something like See and Don't See by Marie Queenie Lyons, and just so many great records. Now, I just briefly, before we go, we're running out of time, but before we go, I want to just ask you about some of the other things that you've been doing. One of my favourite records of the year is the album that you produced for Mark Eitzel. Is it Mr. Ferry? I know the single's Mr. Ferryman.
Hey, Mr. Ferryman.
Okay, I'm going to say that again. The Mark Eitzel album, Hey, Mr. Ferryman. Seems like you hit it off.
Yeah, I love Mark. Yeah, I had a great time. Yeah, I was warned that I wouldn't. and you know, and of course, that, as we were saying just a minute ago, that was the major attraction. that the possibility that it could go terribly wrong was really interesting to me.
And again, you sort of did that thing where you sort of slightly, I think you correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you slightly force his hand in terms of the title track? You kind of leaned on him to kind of pull out like a pop song.
Well, it's the last 10 years, which has the lyric about the ferryman, and I was given a bunch of demos which he'd recorded a couple of years previously, and one of them, lots of Mark songs. His fans won't take offence to this. Are quite slow, mid-paced, and they're very emotional. And he had this one thing in the middle. It had this quite what I call the shuffle beat, the dun 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 dun, that kind of shuffle beat, and it sounded a little bit like the Wonder Stuff, you know, and but it had this brilliant lyric to it, and I loved the line. I've spent the last 10 years trying to waste half an hour, and I just loved that. So when we started trying to compile songs, we sat together for the first few days, just trying to getting him to say, look, play me everything you've got, and I said, what about that one, you know? And I hated the rhythm of it. And so I said, look, what about we just turn it around and do it like, you know, something of Rumours or something, you know, one of those, you know, a 70s road, you know, something you'd hear on the radio in a 70s film, you know, and that was the idea of it, and I just pulled it out of it. And Mark was great because he just let me do. I think he had it in his head that the reason he was coming here to London to do this was to give me a free rein, trust me, you know. And I think that's a great thing. Getting trust from an artist is the greatest thing. You know, you feel once you've got their trust, then it will work both ways. Because I want to respect that trust as well. It means I don't want to then say, right, I'm going to do whatever I want, and you know, you kind of actually want them to like it. You know, you want to draw them in and get the best out of what you're trying to add. You know, and it references my, you know, reverence of people like Jack Nitzsche. You know, how they were arrangers. They didn't write the songs necessarily, but they came in and they thought, how about you could do this? What about trying this? What about turning the rhythm upside down? What about doing it 3 times? What about adding strings? What about taking the strings out? You know, all those those what ifs, and I love being in that position, and so Mark gave me that opportunity, and it was, and I knew that every song would have a great lyric. I mean, his major strength is his words are just fantastic.
Absolutely,
you know.
And
I mean, a couple of occasions he was rewriting. He'd go into the booth and he'd say, "Let me do that again," and he'd sing it, and he'd rewrite the words. I've never seen anyone else do that. And he'd say to me, "Which one do you?" And I'm like, "Oh Jesus!" I'd say, "Oh, the second one's better." But they were all just as good. I would have gone for any, you know. And
he's a genius. I mean, I think
I think he is.
I just think he's testament. I think he just. One day the world will just kind of remember on a major scale. He might take a song in a film or something, but you know, it'll get, you know, as long as you keep every song is like a message in a bottle. I think as long as you keep throwing them out there.
But I wanted that song. I wanted him to have a pop song. We talked a bit about how, you know, no one does any pop with me. You know, I'm just this miserable American song, right? And I'm like, well, let's do something that's upbeat and radio. Why not? Let's do it. You know, with a lyric that's about, you know, being kicked out, falling out of a bar and crossing the sticks and
absolutely
whatever. So I like the way it's a cheery, upbeat track.
We're almost out of time. I'm just going to ask you I'm going to ask you a production question, just in terms of if, you know, is there a record that you wish you had produced?
Oh.
Or a production that you think, I don't think I'll ever be able to sort of exceed that. Just a production that's so inspired and so perfect.
Oh, you think, God, you've caught me totally. I mean, it's probably something like Move Over, Darling. Just little moments that happen in records that I just say to myself, oh, my God, I wish I'd done that. There's a moment in Move Over, Darling, which, this is a really technical thing, but bear with me, where the strings, the high violins come in, and they come in a tone below the root of the song. And for me, that's a eureka moment for me. What that says to me in big letters is that was someone's idea. For most people, that's just the strings coming in. But for me, the note they come in on, it just says tension. You know, it just hangs on the wrong note. And I just love that. And I just feel like Jack Nitzsche did that so that I would see that one day.
And of course, now I want to go and listen to Move Over, Darling and see exactly what you mean. It is an amazing song. What a wonderful way to spend an hour. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, pleasure.
And yes, I hope you enjoy some of the records that this will no doubt spur you to go and spend time with. You've been listening to the Ace podcast. I'm Pete Paphides, and you've been listening to the words of Bernard Butler. You've been listening to the Ace podcast. For more excellent music, you can scoot over to the Ace Records website, www.acerecords.co.uk, for all the wonderful music you could possibly need.